All right, we're talking about the secondary circuit. And yesterday we left off with the secondary windings, which were in the coil assembly. So moving outside now of the, what is that called, coil assembly, we have, not in necessarily the right order, we'll go with the distributor, depending on how you want to say it. Distributor or distributor block. Distributor block. This brown and or black item. Were the high tension leads attached? What are high tension leads? Were high tension leads attached? Leads. Another name for high tension leads would be spark plug wires. There we go. One for each cylinder. What else we got? It's not on my notes, but there's a felt strip and a felt washer. Felt washer, when it pulls out, looks like a washer. Felt strip, when it's pulled out, looks like a strip of felt. Let me think. Yeah, these little things take a lot of maintenance. You gotta put little caps in here. It's got a oil light bushing in there that absorbs oil. So you put oil in there and you bake it with the oil in there, and the oil goes out into little pores, and then so it's kind of permanently oiled. Wipe it all out. It's got the springs. When the springs fall out, it sucks unless you have the right tool to get them in. Anyway, have the block, and then we have the distributor gear, a little white plastic thing, or the rotor. Rotor or distributor gear. Obviously, it's driven by rotating magnet. It contains the distributor gear electrode. Distributor gear electrode, sometimes called the finger. Somebody says give them the finger, it's what they want you to do. You give them this piece right here. And contains the carbon brush that receives secondary voltage from coil high tension tab. What else I got here? Well, talking about all the parts in the secondary. What comes next?
Spark plug.
Before the spark plug.
The
Yep. High tension leads and spark plug. All right, that is all of the parts. Now we get down to the operation. So I shall write some operation notes for you, which we've already talked about. Operation. All right. So as the magnet is turned, what kind of magnet is it? A what?
A rotating magnet.
Rotating. What kind of magnet, though?
Permanent.
Permanent, which means that it is not the other one, which would be electromagnet. Okay, so it's permanent. So as the permanent magnet is turned, all right, lines of flux. Lines of flux travel through what? the shoes through the pole shoes. Pole shoes and
Soft iron cord.
the pole shoe extensions, which we won't write, and into the Allen,
Soft iron cord.
into the soft iron core. Soft iron. I'm going to put coil core just so we're very clear on that. And how would we describe this flux that is happening right there? Alternating is correct. So what did we say about AC? We can use the same words. Periodically changes direction, but is constantly changing amplitude. Okay. The flux periodically reverses, but is constantly changing, which is what I wrote in my notes. Changing amplitude is fine. Let me see. Well, that's a weird thing. It's like I left a sentence off. What would I want right there? We'll try this one. Let me see. The changing magnitude of the flux magnitude of the flux cuts through, that's a key word there, cuts through the primary coil windings. Got a lot of stuff I wrote here. I don't think I need you to write it all down. Let me just check. Oh, lucky me. I've got like 2 page 7s, 2 page 8s. Notes are all shoveled together. This is going to be fun for me. 1, 2, 3. Oh, it's the same stuff. That's right. Well, okay, so we don't need to write all of this because it's a lot. And I don't, sometimes I get a little wordy when I'm writing notes. I'm like, oh, I should mention this. All right, the voltage induced in a coil of wire is proportional to the rate of change of flux linkages. Flux linkage is when one line of flux passes through one coil turn. So it's a point we can make. So we can go with that. So the voltage induced in a coil, voltage induced in a coil of wire is proportional to the rate of change, of flux linkages, Flux linkage is one line of flux through one turn of the coil, but that's not so important. But what does this mean? So voltage induced in a coil of wire is proportional to the rate of change, which is to say that the voltage induced in a coil is proportional to the rate of change. So how much voltage I get is proportional to the rate of change. What is my rate of change right now?
Slow.
Very slow. But when we speed it up, we get more voltage. If I had an electric drill, if I put it on here, I'd have a flashlight. Very, very efficient flashlight, I might add. So which is to say that the faster we turn the rotating magnet, the more what? More voltage we're going to get out. Well, that's why we talk about the coming in speed of a magneto. Coming in speed of a magneto, it should fire consistently all of the cylinders, 4, 6, 8, when the magneto is turning at what RPM?
150.
Yeah, 150. By the time it gets to 150, it should be sparking all of the cylinders consistently, which you're checking the coming in speed to check the power of the magneto. If it wasn't for coming in speed, it would just say, well, I'll just run on a test stand. If it fires, right? Well, you wouldn't want to do that. And the engine doesn't operate at 150 RPM, but you still, it's just a way of determining how strong the magneto is, how well it's built, how strong the rotor is, how it's interacting with the points, the coils, everything else. So, all right, the faster the change, the more current will flow, or the more voltage. More current will flow. All right, if we need more flux linkages can be increased by doing what? So remember, flux linkage is one line of flux magnet across one coil. So how could I increase my total flux linkage? How can I increase that?
Stronger magnet.
Okay, more turns. I heard more turns. I heard stronger magnet. And lastly,
Add another one?
Higher coming in speed. Or so close.
well, higher coming in speed means that it didn't work until it got faster.
More magnet.
Well, that'd be like stronger magnet.
Put them closer together.
What?
Closer together.
You're not wrong. I don't have that. But yes, that's absolutely could be on there. Should be. I'll put that. Now you have another thing to write.
Faster rotation.
Faster rotation. Hey, what'd you come up with that? Faster rotation, faster movement.
That's different from
Coming in speed is the speed at which this is turning to consistently fire all 6 or all 4, all the cylinders. That's coming in speed. The speed at which it consistently fires all of them. Follow?
Yes.
Okay. So if I built a magneto and the coming in speed was 250, that means that it has to spin up to 250 before they all fire consistently. But you built one that fired 25 RPM. Whose is better? Whose is better? No. Okay. So coming in speed, how can I say this? Somebody help me out here.
That has nothing to do with the speed of the magnet.
It is the speed of the... Coming in speed is... well, I don't want to just keep saying the same thing over again, so you guys help me out. What is coming in speed?
Lowest RPM that all spark plugs fire.
Lowest RPM that will what?
Not all spark plugs will fire.
That all spark plugs will fire consistently. Do you want it to fire
Because your motor's never going to really spin at.
25? This is a bench test thing.
Yeah.
So do you want your magneto to consistently work at 25 RPM? I mean, is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? It says 150 is the minimum. Is 25 good or bad?
Good.
Good, because it's firing before. The book says by the time you are spinning 150, it had better be working. But it doesn't work until we get to 250. What could be wrong with it?
Contacts.
Any one of those things.
We have a weak magnet. Did I lose you?
You lost some turns?
You okay?
Yeah,
Lost some turns.
faster movement, I just keep thinking faster RPM speed, but,
Yeah, faster
That
RPM.
is- that is-
Faster RPM is true, same thing.
okay.
What does that mean?
That means more flux, which is more voltage.
More voltage, more power. So the faster I turn it, the more,
Flux, which is more power.
and the more power I get out of it. So another way of checking how well it's built is to see how slow it turns and still works. If it turns slow and still works, well, it's going to turn fantastic. It's going to work fantastic when you speed it. Speed it up, go real fast, right? So it's just a measurement of, coming in speed's a measurement of that. So the big takeaway from this is, especially this, with anything that produces voltage, magneto, alternator, generator, the faster you spin it, the more voltage it creates. The faster you spin a magnet across wires, the more voltage it creates. Speed is a huge function of that. So the faster I spin it, the more power. Okay, we'll go with power. All right. How come this isn't working right now?
There's no relative measure.
You almost got it.
Did I?
That's how that works.
Ah, I got shocked. I think it's counteracting the magnet inside. Well, would it work this way?
You know,
Why not?
Because it's not cutting across
You
the
got-
magnet.
I was gonna say barely.
You have to go this way, right?
Yeah.
Well, you can really feel it pulling on it too. But if I turn it like this, it'll probably work. I'm not. Spending all day doing that. Okay. There's one inside. Okay, there must be change. Must be change. Must be change. Must be a change. Influx to induce voltage. That is why the light does not come on when I put this magnet here. I got lots of turns. And yeah, I got two magnets. Still not doing anything. I could add a third magnet. Not helping. So I got stronger magnet. I put them closer together. But what am I missing? Gotta have relative movement. So how do you get relative movement inside the magneto? No change equals no voltage. Big change. Big change equals big voltage. Use few words. Save time. See world. So much of this, I don't love what I wrote. So I think I'm going to just change it while I'm talking here. All right, so let's go back just a little bit then, and I'm going to just go off my own mind here instead of my notes. All right, so where did we leave it? We have the magnetic circuit, which is the rotating magnet, pole shoe extensions, coil core. Here's my coil core. And we have magnetic flux going back and forth in there, right?
Mhm.
There's no voltage in the coil core. There never will be. So when some of you guys are doing the oral, you're talking about the voltage in the coil core. There's no voltage. Is there voltage in the coil core? Nope. What is in the coil core? Magnetic flux, and it's going back and forth. So we have this constant movement, right? Not only is it going back and forth, but it builds up and goes the other way. It builds up, goes the other way. So it builds up, goes the other way. So it's constantly changing. So we have change.
Yes.
Faster we spin it, the more change we get. more voltage we get. But where are we getting the voltage? So let's just say the constantly changing flux in the coil core expands out and cuts through the primary windings. Yeah?
Yep.
I can live with that. All right. So what do I want to put now? What happens next? Okay. This, if I say this, you know, I'm talking about that. This creates a voltage, which is current flow, in the primary. When the points are closed. Yeah, so this creates current flow in the primary. So what do we got? We got flowing in the coil core was what? Magnetic lines of flux. Voltage?
No.
Nope, never will be. So what do we have flowing now through the primary? Voltage, current flow in the primary when the points are closed. I'm going to have to get really good at Roman numerals here if I'm going to keep doing this. This current flow creates a magnetic field Yes, electromagnetic. Electromagnetic field in the primary. Creates a magnetic field in the primary because current's flowing. So we've got magnet here, coil core, not an electromagnet. It's a magnet, it's not even a permanent magnet, it's a temporary magnet coming off the permanent magnet. Boom. So magnetic lines of flux in the primary expand out, cut across, sorry, let me try it again. The magnetic lines of flux in the coil core expand out across the primary. Because we have relative movement of flux in the primary, across the primary, we create voltage, current flow in the primary, which makes an electromagnet out of the primary. Everybody follows? Okay. You with me, Malik?
Yep.
Cool. It creates an electromagnet out of the primary. And this electromagnet, E-L-E-C-T-R-O, cuts across the secondary coil. So now we got just a transformer, like we talked about last week. Got a primary and a secondary. Now, you know, the only difference between this and a transformer is in the transformer, we basically just hooked up to here a battery or some sort of AC, a battery that had a vibrator on it. The battery pulsed created movement. So you can do that with just a DC battery, put a set of breaker points on that open and close constantly. That will allow current to flow, stop, flow, stop, flow, stop through the coil core. That in turn will kind of create its own, I don't want to get off of the weeds there. So what was I talking about? Transformer. So our transformer, we had an AC hooked up to it, or we could hook up DC with vibrator points. So in our transformer, we had a primary coil, and the primary coil built up and cut across the secondary and collapsed. cut across secondary and collapsed. And every time it cut across the secondary, it created voltage in the secondary on the way up, on the way down. So it's the same thing. All right, so current flow creates magnetic field in the primary. This electromagnetic cuts across the secondary coil, inducing, well, let's just leave right there before we get that. All right, so it cuts across the secondary coil. Then what happens? 5, 6, 7, 8. Oops, that's I, X. Look at me go. What happens now?
Voltage is induced into the secondary.
Okay, so we've got,
Only when the contact.
yeah, so we have the electromagnet lines of flux cutting across the secondary. And they're just hanging out there right now and haven't done much. So now what happens?
The break
Contact.
comes open.
The point's open. So the rotating magnet reaches the E-gap position, which is
10.
a number of degrees past neutral and the point's open. When the point's open, the electromagnetic field electromagnetic field of the which coil?
Primary.
Primary. Collapses rapidly and induces a large voltage in the secondary. I'll tell you where I went off here on my weeds here, so we don't have to write all this. So, let's see, must be a change in the flux to induce voltage, no change, no voltage, and I've talked about the direction of current flow, which really is not important. But if we held a wire in our left hand and our fingers show current flow, the thumb points the direction of flux, not important. If we know flux flow, we can also see current flow, not important. Current flows. As long as you understand current flows, it doesn't matter if it goes this way or that way, current's flowing. You're good to go. Talked about Lenz's law here. The current that is established creates its own field that is opposite to the applied field, something we already talked about. When flux is building, the counter EMF opposes a buildup. When flux is decreasing, counter EMF opposes a drop. You know what I'm talking about there? When in a coil, when it's building up and you have current flowing in, you have counter EMF built up in the coil that opposes it, and then when the current is dying off, counter EMF builds up and opposes the die off. Which, the reason why I wrote that is because you take the static flux curve that I showed you, just the basic AC wave, and we add the resultant flux curve, which became kind of the square, or it held it off for a while. So when we looked at the static flux curve, oh, that wasn't bad. Static flux curve, but the resultant flux curve stays out here a little bit longer and would then start to follow it later because it's too slow. It slows down, so it would follow it, but right about here, we open up the breaker points and kill it, so it's got to drop all the way down into here and then start building up again. That's that big, nasty change that we want in the second. So Lenz's law, breaker points are designed to open when the greatest change of flux is happening. I don't really have a, now I'm off my points here, but I'll write that. The breaker point's open. Points open when the greatest change of flux is happening. And where is the greatest change of flux happening?
10 degrees after neutral.
In most mags, it's about that. But I don't want you to think that every single mag is 10 degrees. I've seen some that are 8, I've seen some a little bit more.
The EGOT position.
But most of your bendix are 10 degrees. So yes, and that is known as the
EGOT position.
E-gap. So the E-gap, which I already wrote on there. E-gap is efficiency gap is where it comes from. I can write a few things about E-gap. Let me see. See E-gap. E-gap. E-gap is the efficiency gap. This is where they get the name from. Efficiency gap. It is defined as, what's the definition of it? Good. Okay. The number, number of degrees past neutral. Past neutral at which the point's open. E-gap is let's see. E-gap is a number set by the manufacturer and adjusted internally by who? By you. By the mechanic. E-gap will vary by model, but is usually 10 degrees. When the breaker point's open, the primary coil was holding the original field in the coil core while the magnet has already started trying to produce a flux field in the opposite direction. That's going back up here. Looking at this drawing right here. When the breaker point's open, which is right here, breaker point's open, the primary coil, that's what the little square up here, I can make that red. The primary coil, which I'll make this right there, primary coil, was holding the original field in the coil core, which would be the static flux curve, which kind of went away now because it really is the resultant flux curve. So when the breaker point's open, the primary coil was holding the original field in the coil core while the magnet has already started trying to produce a flux field in the opposite direction. So the magnet is rotating and it's already gone past neutral and it's trying to go backwards, and yet we're still up here with the resultant flux curve. So your book may talk about this tension being developed inside the magneto. The rotating magnet's already reversed. It's already trying to go the other way, but because of Lenz's law and the interaction between that flux in the magnetic side and what's happening in the electromagnetic coil that we've created, there's this tension, right? Magnet's saying, hey, I'm already gone the other way. I'm reversed over here. What's going on? And the primary coil's saying, but wait a minute, I'm a little slow. We're still up here. And so you have this big difference between the two. And as soon as you open up those points, then bam, it drops down and catches up. And so that's why you get that sudden rapid change through there. Secondary winding has about how many times more turns?
100.
About 100. So Secondary winding has about, what number am I? X. So secondary winding has about 100 times more windings. So what kind of transformer is it?
Step up,
Step up. What's the ratio?
about 100 to 1.
100 to 1. So for every 1 volt you had in the primary, you get 100 on the other side. So if we end up with 20,000 volts on the secondary, we must have 200 on the other side. That'll get your attention. All right. Well, I guess this will be XI then.
Voltage limitations. If you had 500 times the windings there, would you get,
Well, if you did,
I mean, what's the max, is there a maximum voltage? Could you get 1 million volts out of a,
no, that's kind of where I'm going now. So thank you for that. The amount of secondary voltage. Oops. Voltage is dependent on the spark gap. As soon as the voltage, well, I'll just tell you what it is, I'll write it. So if you didn't have a spark gap and you just had a piece of wire that kind of ran all the way around in the secondary instead of a spark plug with a gap, or let's do it this way. If I run the magneto and I have a spark plug and I just have it sitting here on the bench in open air, and by the way, in electricity you have to have a complete path. So if you just hold the spark plug out in open air, there's no complete path because the spark plug, it's got a center electrode that goes inside the spark plug. You got the threads and the whole spark plug up here, little thing on the top, and then out the bottom, you got some threads. Then you have a little electrode that goes like that, right? And the spark jumps from one thing to the other, right there. Well, the center electrode, I'll make a different color. The center electrode, we could say is, in this case, the positive, and the threads and this electrode are the negative part. So this negative part has to actually be grounded to the airframe, the engine. If it's not, then you don't have a complete path. You don't need a spark. Nothing's going to come out. There's no path for it to go to. So you have to remember that. So when you're, and I tell you this, hopefully you remember, one of the really stupid things people tell you about magnetos is you do have to figure out which one's firing, because you have to know which one is the number one and which is going to go the number one cylinder. You can't just like say, well, I don't know, I'll just shove it on the back of the engine and hope that it's pointing at the right one. The whole thing has to be set up, which we'll talk about. And one of the ways that people set these things up, if you're being stupid, is they say spark it out, right? So you'll take it and you'll just get it and you'll kind of twist it in one spot. You can twist a Bendix mag fast enough to make it spark. So you just kind of keep going back over one spot. You go, okay, well, that one's sparking right there. Well, you can't do that if it's up here in your hands. If the thing dangling down, it won't spark. And if you sit on a bench, you got a wooden bench, and still you got a lead coming out with a spark plug. Well, wood is not conductive electricity, but you got to do it on a metal bench. But there's no need to ever spark one out because there's like better ways to do it. Anyway, just want you to remind you, if I can, that it takes a complete circuit. You've got to have the spark plug grounded out, or the whole thing doesn't work.
You don't put your knee against the table.
Well, that's up to you. Did you? Did you get shocked? All right. So spark depend on the spark plug. As soon as I was making a point and then I forgot. This better get a HIF care. Sorry, it's a Biden thing. Lost my mind there, so. Quoting Biden.
Anyway.
Bad healthcare? What's some other Bidenisms? I
Oh, the million, trillion, billion.
forget. Anyway.
Way to get things done if you hold near and dear to you is. Anyway.
As soon as the voltage is high enough, to jump the gap, the voltage is dissipated. So the point I was trying to make before I went all off on something else, if you had a magneto and you were sparking it out in open air and you were on a metal bench and you said, well, I'm just going to spark it, put it on a metal bench because that's what I say has to work, and you're just kind of sparking it, it'll spark with not a real bright blue, but maybe you might get a little blue out of it, maybe more like an orangish yellow, which is not a real hot spark. Now, I don't know. You're not going to need a lot of voltage. I don't know how much it'd be. Let's just say 1,000, I'm just making up a number, 2,000 volts, because it's a very small gap on that spark plug. So it doesn't take a lot. So how much is this producing? Well, just enough to jump that gap. So let's just say it's only 1,000 volts now. You're not spinning it fast, just enough to hear a little tick, see a little spark, little orangish spark. But when you put it in the engine, remember I told you, now you have all that compression, which pushes all that air in there. So it makes electrically, instead of having a 0.1018 gap, it's going to look like a gap that's more like half an inch inside the engine. So it's going to have to build up to 20,000 to spark across it. So the amount of voltage in the secondary is purely dependent on whatever it's going to take to jump the gap to make current flow. And yes, there is a limit. So if I stretch it out that far and try to jump a gap like that, it'll never work. That gap won't work. Probably, you might get one up to half an inch, I think. That's pushing it. Spin it really, really fast. You can try it if somebody wants to mess around with that. Let's see. So spark plug gap is, hey, I had that number right. Well, on the right, the spark plug gap is only about 0.018. Air is an insulator. The more molecules in the gap, the wider the gap will be, electrically speaking. We could write that. What the heck, right? Except I'm out of room, so I got to delete everything. And don't nobody say, can you go back for a minute? Because it's gone. All right, so this was sub points here. Spark plug gap. Is only about 0.018 inches. Remember that air is an insulator. Air is an insulator. The more air molecules in the gap, the wider the gap will be. Electrically speaking. Which is not to say that the gap has really changed. It's always going to be 0.018, but electrically speaking, it's going to seem to the electricity, if it had a thought process, that it's a much, much wider gap because you shoved a bunch more air in there. So it takes much less voltage to jump a spark gap. Spark gap at normal atmospheric pressure than it does, and it does in a pressurized cylinder. Oh, I actually do have some numbers. It'd be 5,000 volts versus about 24,000. Which is because, technically speaking, at 5,000 volts, it is about 4.7 psi. It should be 14.7. 14.7 psi versus 200 to 300 psi. All right, I got a lot of stuff here about construction. I don't know if we need to get into all of the construction aspects of this. Let's just see if there's any good points worth tearing out of here. So construction. Construction. All right. Well, they had to put a lot of thought in this little thing here, for old as it is and how cool it is. So let's see. Design 2. Control magnetic forces. Can't have magnetic lines of flux running rampant in aircraft. Usually about that far away from a magneto, you have a compass. Your life depends on that compass. Life depends on the magnetos. Can't have the two interfering each other. Well, the compass isn't going to affect the magneto, but the magneto sure can affect the compass. And you need that compass. Apparently. I never look at mine. So, yeah. I got other stuff to look at. Withstand heat. Withstand heat. It gets hot back there in the back of the engine. Obviously, you have to have strength, durability, all that stuff, and proper insulation to withstand electrical forces. Well, that sentence on itself doesn't mean a whole lot, but what kind of insulation do I have here? Air. Air is our insulator. If you don't have any insulation between this point and this point, what will it do? It'll jump over and fire that one, or jump over and fire this one. Well, aside from the fact that you're not firing the cylinder that's supposed to be fired, you're firing a cylinder that should not be firing. And that could be a significant problem. One of my past students has a G35 Bonanza. If you don't know what that is, it's a gorgeous airplane. It's $1 million single engine Bonanza with a full glass panel. And he flies it all over the world. You talk to me, he's like, yeah, you know, he brought it back from England. He flew to England in the thing. It's like, man, that's crazy. He said, not as crazy as flying South America. He said that was really bad. And I believe he used to fly ferry flights, aircraft for Beechcraft. I think is kind of how he got this experience. But he's told me a couple of weird stories, like, wow. One of them, he was ferrying an aircraft over the Atlantic. And I want to say it was at night, because I'm picturing it at night. And when he said when you do it, you wear one of those life suits, those immersion suits. But you're allowed to take it down to like your waist and kind of, you know, the arms are here because it's uncomfortable. So he's flying. And of course, it was this G35 is it's not pressurized. It's non-turbocharged, which is different. Cessna probably would have turbocharged it, but non-turbocharged. So he's flying reasonably high, and he pretty much starts to lose the engine. And this thing's going down, and he's over the Atlantic. So he's up high, you know, non-pressurized. Huh?
I said that's where you want to be.
Yeah. Yeah, non-pressurized. So, I mean, I don't know. Let's just say you're not going to go much higher than 14,000 feet. Could have been. So around 14,000. So he's going down. he's going down the Atlantic, and I want to say he had somebody, it was like a 2-ship thing, and he's, somebody was in the radio shot, and he's like, man, I'm going down. So he's going down. This engine's it's quitting, and it's just burping and farting and doing all kinds of weird crap to him. It didn't just go and stop. It's just making real, and the EGTs, CHTs are all over the place. Things are going crazy. So he puts on his suit, and it's going down. And he's just, he's radioing his position. He knows he's going into the water. And he gets down really low. Boom, engine smooths out and starts running fine. It's magnetos. Ran out of insulation. So it started arcing around inside. It was just a bad magneto that had tracked up somehow in there. And as soon as he got low enough and packed enough insulation in there, he was fine. But
His pants were.
I was going to say that. Completely ruined his pants.
Gotta buy a new wetsuit.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
There goes the fuel efficiency.
Yeah. So you got to stay low. On turbocharged pressurized aircraft that are designed, piston aircraft, that are designed to fly much, much higher, which is why you put the turbocharger on, and this is why you pressurize the aircraft, they pressurize the magnetos. You actually take out one of the vent caps, and you put in a much smaller vent cap with maybe only one hole in it for the outlet. And on the other side, you'll put another one on with a nipple on it, and that goes to the upper deck pressure, which is your intake manifold before the fuel is added. And you run pressurizations. You pressurize the magnetos just like you pressurize the cabin.
Is that what they did with the high altitude bombers in World War II?
I think they did, yeah, I think they had to.
Yeah,
25, 30,000 feet almost.
20,000.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was the tail number, if you remember, off that Manza? The one that guy flew, that one here?
Oh, Juan's, what's his tail number?
Yeah,
Of his plane?
the Manza you were talking about,
The one that was going down?
I guess.
Nah, I think he was fairing. I don't think it was his. I don't know. I don't remember that much of the story. So, is it break time? It's break time.
33.